we have a really special event bringing some just really interesting, just lovely people together that are part of our community, knowing kind of who would connect well with each other and just curating that community. Here's the show. We've got an incredible panel. I've interviewed the three of them. They'll never admit it, but I did. And so we'll kind of rehash a little bit of that interview. And I'll introduce them formally. After this panel, we'll also have a panel, just a Q&A with an impact investor, very substantial entrepreneur himself. And so we've got two pieces to the content, and then we'll break, and we'll drink more scotch, and we'll smoke cigars, and we'll hang and network for the rest of the evening. So thank you for being here. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Arcady Sosinov. He's the founder and CEO of Freewire Tech. I'd like to introduce Kevin Czinger, who's the co-founder and CEO of Lukas Czinger. And Lukas Czinger, co-founder, SVP of Operations for Czinger Vehicles.
I was going to start by saying I wish you, sat him one further away. I see him so much,
we didn't have a good day.
Yeah. We'll deal with this seating. So, thank you all for joining us, and excited to talk with you all this evening, answer questions, and get to know you all. Kevin's going to give the long-winded version of what I'm going to say here, but I'll keep it a little bit short and say, Divergent, the parent technology company that Kevin founded about 7-8 years ago, and I joined 6 years ago, is really a company that is taking on one of the larger missions in the world, which is looking at manufacturing overall and saying, can we take a completely new approach to this?
Lukas is my partner in these businesses. He, probably unlike most family businesses, he's not someone I'm passing the baton to, but someone that almost from the start I created a company with together. And to be even more concise than you, what we're really doing is, I'm 63, Lukas is 28. We're both inventors and engineers and business builders. Our company has about 530 patents now over the course of 6 years, which if you're building a company, that's a lot of IP. I'm the lead inventor, or the sole inventor, on about 80 of those patents, Lukas on about 45 of them. And what we're really doing is taking manufacturing from 100-year-old technology, which is really like the typewriter, to something that is fully digital, like Mac desktop publishing. So literally, for the design of something, say you have a company, whether it's Ferrari or Mercedes, they provide some design input as to what they want to do. And literally, we input that into a machine that generates in 3 dimensions a perfect design for a structure, prints it on machines that we've designed with our own purpose-built materials being printed. So imagine you can create the perfect set of Lego blocks for a vehicle, print those blocks, and then have an assembly system that's a digital equivalent of that design and print system. A system where those Lego blocks come in, and it doesn't matter whether it's for a drone, or a Ferrari, or a Maserati, or a Ford, or an Aston Martin, and that gets assembled. And that system stays the same. It's simply digital input and a physical output. We announced with the parent company, which has raised about $500 million. As David said, and thanks David, we just closed on another $240 million financing. About a month ago, it was announced that Aston Martin will be building the rear half of the Vantage for them, and I would say in the future, we'll end up building full vehicles. And over the next 6 months, you'll see we've been working with 8 of the major global OEMs in vehicle programs that range from hundreds of vehicles to hundreds of thousands of vehicles, all digitally manufactured. And what I would say is this is as big, in my view, even bigger a transition than going from analog to digital content. For the first time, we're going from actual analog design and manufacture of the built world to full digital design and manufacture of the built world. That's all.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
It's a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. And first of all, David, thanks for having me and for featuring us in the first event we've had in 3 years. And I just got to say, I'm incredibly, I love the content that you produce and the style and the fact that you add a personal touch in all the publications and articles that you write. As an entrepreneur, you tell these stories every single day, but it's very rare that you get to add that personal touch. And so it's just been a pleasure working with you, and I'm sure my colleagues feel the same way. And to the Four Seasons, thank you for hosting us for the amount of money that this unit costs. I could probably start another $1 billion company. But my name is Arcady. I'm the CEO and founder of Freewire Technologies. And I have with me my CFO, Michael Lear, as well as a number of my investors in the room. And we built a technology platform to solve the biggest pain point within the EV charging infrastructure market. The market has certainly evolved. There's a groundswell of demand for charging infrastructure, not only in the US, but globally. But there's something very complex holding it back, and that's utility infrastructure. I spoke with a customer this morning, and this is an anecdote, but it's an interesting one. I spoke with a customer this morning who's looking to deploy ultra-fast charging on their site, and the utility quoted them in 2026 to bring out the utility infrastructure necessary to deploy only 2 charging stations. Now, that is a unique example. That's a standard deviation away from the norm, but anytime you try to deploy charging in the current market, you're looking at 12 to 18 month delays on that utility infrastructure. You're looking at hundreds of thousands to low millions of dollars in cost. And frankly speaking, when you look at scale, our utility grid is not equipped to handle the power requirements of ubiquitous, ultra-fast charging. And so there is no way to transition to a fully electric fleet in the US unless we solve that key and critical issue. And so we've developed a technology that pairs broadly power electronics with battery storage. And that battery acts as a buffer to enable ultra-fast charging using low-power existing infrastructure. So we deploy ultra-fast chargers with no infrastructure upgrades, with no utility upgrades required. And in many cases, these systems are lower CapEx cost than anything else out there in the market. They're certainly faster to install and they're significantly lower operating costs. We built the business into a 200-person business right now. We have our headquarters located in San Francisco, where most of our employees sit, but I also have half a dozen people here in LA. We have a production facility in Monterrey, Mexico. We have an advanced technology center in Boulder. We have a subsidiary in the UK with about 10 staff out there. And we've deployed our products now in 25 states and 4 countries, and we're expanding from there. And the really interesting part about the strategy is that we are solving the pain point of the day. The pain point of the day is utility infrastructure. And those of you who have built construction projects, you know this pain point. But what we're doing, interestingly enough, is we're deploying behind-the-meter energy storage batteries. And that storage we then use to really levelize the grid. So our charging infrastructure doesn't strain the grid, it bolsters the grid. And that allows us to then control the flow of energy coming from the utility, coming to our site hosts, our partners. And that creates a very powerful flywheel that, frankly speaking, we capture a significant amount of revenue from. So it's an interesting story, it's an interesting technology, and happy to tell you more.
Just real quick, you know, the origin stories are always fun. How'd you get started? What was the impetus? So you want to just like share kind of the early stages, just one little anecdote about maybe that LinkedIn parking lot?
Yeah, I'd love to share it. Bear with me for a second. So as you mentioned, I have a passion for anything automotive, right? I grew up and my relationship with my father was centered around a car. You know, he was a taxi driver, and I spent my weekends, you know, fixing suspensions and changing transmissions. That was my life. And so I wanted to work in automotive, but like any good Eastern European immigrant, I went into finance. And it was felt a little bit of disconnected in my work. I worked for a hedge fund for a number of years. But I worked for a gentleman in the hedge fund world named Jeremy Grantham. And for those of you who are in finance who may know that name, Jeremy Grantham I'd say he's a Malthusian, and he's very big into climate technology and climate investing, and I learned a lot from him. And I had an opportunity to go to grad school up in San Francisco, and there was a class project in which they asked you to start a company, and the first thing I thought of was, I'm going to solve the biggest pain point I can in the automotive industry. This was around 2014 when the first Tesla Model S was hitting the road. There were a few Nissan Leafs, but they were still toys at this point. But it was clear to me that the biggest pain point was charging infrastructure and utility infrastructure behind that. You could see it clear as day. So I developed a mobile battery system, right? I actually, believe it or not, couldn't find batteries, couldn't get batteries, couldn't buy batteries at the time. So I found a wrecked Nissan Leaf in a junkyard in Las Vegas and pulled the batteries out of that vehicle, put it onto a mobile platform and started charging cars in the parking lot of the LinkedIn offices in Sunnyvale, California. They gave me a check, right? It was pretty small at the time, it was $60,000, but it was enough to pay for ramen noodles. But in that parking lot, I quite literally moved this cart around, charging people's cars using little infrastructure, would add, plug in all the vehicles, hop in my car, drive over to Sand Hill Road, which a lot of people know is venture capital of the world over there. Drive over Sand Hill Road, put on a suit jacket, and go and knock on doors and try to raise capital. Then go right back to the Lincoln parking lot and keep charging cars and interviewing customers to see how they like the experience. So for anybody that tells you this is a glamorous lifestyle, it is not. And it is hard work. And again, I'm sure my colleagues felt that same way.
Thanks, Arcady. Yeah, end-to-end entrepreneurship, right? It's nonstop. I love those stories. All right. What about you guys? What's the origin of the vehicle, Divergent 3D?
You really want to know? Well, obviously these things are actually all linked together. So around 2006, I co-founded an EV car company and EV battery company. Obviously 2008, 2009 were not great in the United States. I ended up having both of those companies set up as joint ventures in China with an entity of the China Academy of Sciences. And the battery company partnered with Tianjin Lishan, which is the largest Chinese state-owned rechargeable battery company. And around that 2006 time, being somebody who grew up loving nature, I was like, hey, EVs are a good thing for the planet, but these people are stringing together microelectronics format battery cells. The Tesla Roadster had 10,000 plus of these hand-wired computer batteries, and so you look at that and we've all got some finance background, so you look and go, how do you scale something and how do you bring it down the cost curve? And so I put together, also being an inventor and engineer, I put together really the first Western team that did a large format, prismatic, lithium iron phosphate battery cell. And that, the module, the pack, thermal management, battery management system. And so forward a little bit to 2010, like quite a bit before Tesla. I used to be on these panels with J.B. Streubel, who was Tesla's chief engineer, and he would say, well, Kevin is both building an EV car company and a battery company, and there's no need because batteries are just this fungible thing you can buy from everybody. Well, the long and short of the story is by 2010, if you go on, say, YouTube and put my name in and Gary Locke, who was the US Secretary of Commerce under Obama. At that time, you'll see there's a 1 million square foot battery factory, mega factory, really the first one on the planet for EV batteries being manufactured. And that was a joint venture. It's actually what China has scaled up with. Now China represents about 80% of the annual EV battery cell production. And The reality is, in 2010, I actually looked at the manufacturing pollution coming from that factory. So 100% of these factories, the reason why China is very low cost battery manufacturer using this technology is they have coal-fired power. That's their one domestic energy resource, and they have a domestic lithium supply, right? If you manufacture batteries using coal-fired power, you're generating 200 to 300 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt hour of battery you manufacture, right? So take a 90 kilowatt hour Tesla, and by the way, Tesla uses Chinese batteries in over 50% of their vehicles today, right? So those cells, 200 times 90 kilowatt hours, that's 18,000 kilograms of CO2 emitted before the car is ever charged. By the way, if you look at a Toyota Camry, driving 80,000 miles, you get 16,000 kilograms of CO2 emitted from tailpipe exhaust. So when I looked at that, I said, and by the way, at the same time, Lukas was working, I had him work a summer in a manufacturing plant for conversion of Chinese internal combustion engines to EVs up in northeast China for FAW, which is the largest state-owned Chinese car company. He actually, in 2010ish, he learned how to work on a factory floor. He was sort of, I remember walking in once and he was in this dining hall where you'd have like a little tray and you'd be eating a bowl of rice and some vegetables. And like here was this blonde-haired guy in the work suit for the factory among this whole thing.
I think this is a good time. Pass the mic and get your perspective from here.
Well, Borro, you're in this Chinese factory now. Take us to today.
But I'll just say, what happened was I looked and said, the single most important thing that we can do for the planet is figure out how to do manufacturing in a way that's much more efficient and cuts down on emissions.
It uses less coal. It uses less coal in the process.
Well, I think all electricity, sure, for sure.
Yeah, so that was kind of a hell of a summer, to be honest, but learned a couple things. So, how did I come to Divergent? It's pretty clear, it's through my father, right? But I've gone to Yale and studied electrical engineering. I went into finance, seemingly like everyone else here. So I was working biotech M&A at Centerview Partners in San Francisco. Not long after, I called him and I said, I'm going to quit my investment banking job and come work with you, at that time for you. And he said, are you sure you want to do that? Because you're making good money, you're on a good track here, and this is just an idea right now. But in the end, really bet on him, bet on myself, and we got to work. And like you said, it's not glorious at the start. I think I was young enough where I was just so naive that when I came in, it was, let's build this manufacturing system, and I just said okay, and I got to work doing it as best I knew how. So it was putting myself through school initially on robotics, so adding to my engineering knowledge at the same time that I was actually engineering during the day. At this company, that it was finding the people that were going to help me do it. So reading all these papers, Google Scholar, etc., recruiting them from all over the world. So Germany, the UK, you name it, we were going to find these people and bring them in. And then 3 years, it really just head down, engineering and developing, the system that now is, seemingly a little bit more glorious now that there's a very, very fast car that's being produced using that technology. But certainly at the start, it was just a lot of hard work and engineering, and mostly bringing in a lot of really, really good people to help us.
Thank you. How many cars today?
We're selling 110 of the hypercar. The technology company itself, it was announced about 6 weeks ago that Aston Martin is our first customer, and we're shipping right now production frames to them for the Aston Martin Vantage, for a variant of that, and then I'd say over the next 2 years, we'll have another factory in Europe, which will serve probably about a half a dozen different European car companies that are working with us.
Amazing. And Arcady, how many charging stations do you guys have?
We built our 291st charging station on Friday last week. So, and we'll ship a total of about 270 this fiscal year, and about 800 plus next year. So,
Amazing. You guys want to stay like about the life or about the business? Because it's tough, right? You want to dive deep into the doldrums of entrepreneurship, but we want to know some industry-related stuff too, right? So we have a lot of federal tailwinds in EV in particular. Can you speak to how those have supported your businesses respectively?
yeah, it's been nothing but tailwinds this year from a federal policy perspective around electric vehicle and charging infrastructure. So we have the first announced the $7.5 billion of NEVI funding that was part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the $369 billion in funding in the Inflation Reduction Act, about 60 of which is going to decarbonization of transportation. And that money is hitting state DOTs right now, the Departments of Transportation. So projects are being assessed as we speak, and money will start flowing into projects shortly. That there's been some significant news recently around what it means for Buy America, and that's really impacting, I'm sure, my colleagues on the panel over here. So we have always defined Buy America as using U.S. steel, right? Buy America was designed to protect the steel industry. And now that's changing, and that's actually a big change. It's nuanced, and I'm sure only the manufacturing teams understand it, but it's very important. Now it's changing from using U.S. steel and being able to mass produce your products anywhere, including what was it, NAFTA, what is now MCA. Now it's domestic production. It's 55% of the cost of the product being having final assembly in the U.S. That's shifting manufacturing, production to the U.S. And so it's impacting, first of all, not just our trade enemies, right, like China, it's also impacting our friends. So Canada is filing exemptions right now and saying, you're moving jobs from Ottawa down, out of Ottawa. The automotive industry produces a lot up there. Mexico is filing grievances of the same kind. So, it's a really tricky policy because it impacts so many businesses. We actually do a lot of manufacturing in the US, even though people don't quite think of it that way. And so there's a lot of turmoil and turbulence, and I'd actually be interested to hear your opinion on what's happening to manufacturing now that Buy America is more important than ever.
Yeah, I'll give a couple of comments, and then Kevin's probably got more knowledge on it. But really for us, what we pitch to all these OEMs is localizing manufacturing. So be it in the US or be it in the EU or be it in the UK, everyone's facing the similar sorts of pressures around what percentage of your BOM content, what percentage of your product is manufactured in your home country or home region. For us, that's been a tailwind, right? It's helping us establish facilities, it's helping us compete with cost. For the first time, we're seeing the UK and the EU, not want to buy even castings or extrusions or stampings from the China market because they actually need to have a certain percentage of their vehicle manufactured and assembled, in the UK or the EU or the US. So for us, when we're competing with the system on cost as well, and we have the piece where we'll localize to you, we'll have a factory right next to you, we'll supply this, to your vehicle next door. That's been a huge help for us in setting up these facilities. That's why we're heading, to the EU in 2024 with a larger production facility.
And it cuts both ways, right? There are these incentives that help organizations, but also the U.S. has placed a 25% tariff on Chinese batteries, right? Where are batteries mostly produced? We just heard that in China. So you either have to pay more for locally produced batteries, which we do. Our own batteries come from Smyrna, Tennessee, or you have to deal with these major tariffs. And there's other news this morning, and this is actually, I think, a leading indicator to what's going to happen more broadly across the U.S. Canada announced this morning that they are requesting, forcing 3 Chinese companies to divest from their investments in the critical mineral industry in Canada, specifically lithium. So they're saying, Chinese companies, you cannot invest in our lithium production in Canada, and forcing divestiture, which I've never seen anything of that sort in the past in financial markets. So, we're seeing a real deglobalization, and it is impacting supply chains, it is impacting costs. And there's this push and pull. The government will continue to provide handouts and money to try to build these industries up because they are matters of national security, manufacturing, critical minerals, and electric vehicles and charging infrastructure.
It's like Amazon Web Services, right? If you were trying to build, say, some of us were in the late 90s, say you wanted to build a game development company. In most cases, you were having to create your own set of development tools, and you were setting up your own server infrastructure with processing power and memory. You know, today you go to do that anywhere on the planet. You can be a game developer anywhere, right? That technology has been, or the access to that technology has been spread evenly around the planet. How do you do that if you're actually building something in the physical world? You do that if you have basically the equivalent of Mac desktop publishing for industrial manufacturing, meaning you have a digital input and the same set of equipment can print a drone in 1 hour and the next hour print a Bentley and in the next hour print a Ferrari and the next hour print a Ford, all off the same equipment, and then assemble a drone, assemble a Ford, assemble a Ferrari, one right after another on the same equipment. So basically what we've done is have something which can create that localized service, factory as a service around the world. And as things now are becoming deglobalized, regionalized, we're going to be setting up these factories in Germany that would serve, say, a German car company, an Italian car company, a French car company, all out of the same facility, and say a defense or aerospace company as well, all using the same equipment. So, I mean, for us in the U.S. and now I'd say that as a model will allow us to set up regionalized supply chain and regionalized manufacturing for multiple industries, multiple companies out of the same facilities. And that to me is a very positive transformation.
How does that help developing countries?
I would say it helps developing countries in that you can have local entrepreneurs with no capital barrier, no high CapEx expenditure barrier, design products locally, build products locally for local use. And you can then start in this physical built world, start to adapt and create structures the way nature does, right? I mean, the company that we have, the technology company is Divergent Technologies, and that comes from divergent evolution. So you look, Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands and he saw, a common finch go to 34 different niche environments and become 34 subspecies. If you have an adaptive system, then you can set up a factory locally. If you're not creating any barrier, if you're providing factory as a service instead of saying, oh, you want to create a product, you have to build your own factory to do it, then you have that local adaptation. But it's based on an information network that's global. So you have a global information network, a global adaptive manufacturing system, and you have local teams build locally. And for the US, that means you could, they just had the America Makes had me be the keynote in Youngstown, for their annual conference, and you could revitalize a Youngstown or a Fremont or a Bridgeport or wherever you want to talk about.
Is that what most excites you about the long-term vision and mission of what you're building?
Well, for the technology company, absolutely. I mean, there are two things. There are three things. Obviously, it completely changes the economics of manufacturing because it turns most manufacturing into this very high CapEx business into one that's basically zero CapEx and everything's variable cost. The second thing is it allows you to build permanent manufacturing footprints locally because it's part of an adaptive system that never obsoletes itself. I grew up in Cleveland where I obviously saw that at scale. I was the youngest of 5 in a working class family where people were working in the steel mills and auto factories that once the capital equipment became obsolete, disappeared, destroyed the community. So, from a community standpoint, having an adaptive technology that doesn't obsolete, that just obsoletes itself, to me, makes a lot of sense. And then the final thing is, if you look at these structures that we're building, say for Aston Martin or some of the larger companies, like literally we're taking out 20 to 40% of the mass of the material and energy input into the manufacture while maintaining the baseline for crash and durability and these other things. And what that means is, say for an electric vehicle, you're significantly lightweighting it. That allows you to have a smaller battery system. It allows you to downsize all of the different componentry of that vehicle. And it's like 50 years ago, it's called dematerialization. 50 years ago, if we used a beer can, that beer can had a much thicker wall design, a different tab. It required 83 grams of aluminum. Today it requires under 13 grams, 83 to 13. Mass, energy in relation to product use, much more efficient. Use high performance computing and 3D printing to create that efficiency. And then 100% of the materials that we've designed and patented are all 100% closed loop recyclable, meaning at the end of their life, design life, you simply re-atomize them, turn them back into a printable powder, and reprint them.
It's the largest contributor to carbon emissions in the US and most developed nations globally, so we want to get electric vehicles in people's hands, but there's more to it. And at the end of the day, getting electrification and getting electric vehicles in people's hands will actually decrease energy costs for people. And it may seem a little counterintuitive to folks, but the reason that electricity costs are so high is because electricity demand is somewhat unpredictable, right? And we built this hub and spoke model across the US, which we call the US grid, where you have central generation of power and large power plants, and then you have to get that power to its final destination. Over 90% of power generated is lost before it gets to its final destination and used for an effective purpose, like turning on your lights or your washer, dryer, your TV. And that must change. 90% of our power generation cannot be lost through this outdated and aging system. And the way we do that is we decentralize, right? Rather than centralized grid infrastructure, you have a decentralized grid infrastructure that becomes more resilient. You add batteries and you add solar and electric vehicles, and they become not a strain on the grid, but again, they harden the grid. And charging infrastructure, electric vehicles through vehicle-to-grid technologies, charging stations with embedded battery systems, and folks are more inclined to deploy generation such as solar and wind when they deploy charging infrastructure. All of these technologies actually end up hardening our utility grid. And again, this is a matter of national security, right? Back to manufacturing for just a second, and you're perking up, I know, but I worry for the US because while we're transitioning to a deglobalized economy, we don't make a lot of the things that are critical for this ecosystem to work. So use utility infrastructure as an example. The US doesn't make transformers and switchgear. All of these things, these building blocks, these Lego pieces that are required to bring power to your house, we don't make it in the US. And so for us to then just shun away from globalization, it's really shooting ourselves in the foot, and we can't overnight spin up these industries and production facilities when we need them. So this is a long-term battle. There is going to be some pain in the short term, and I think the way we get away from it is we rely on these kind of, in my industry at least, decentralized technologies to move away from this aging, frankly, expensive utility grid that we have.
Lucas, what excites you about the future park?
I'm excited in general, but I'd say it's really at two levels. One is what I'd say is macro level, right? So mission level. For me, the environmental picture is what I'm most interested in and really having a large impact on. That drives me, knowing I'm working on something that's related to solving, what I think is an absolute crisis. What else, gets me up is problem solving. I think I'm a problem solver. I get obsessed with things. If I haven't solved something, I'm gonna dream about it. I'm gonna think about it while I'm trying to sleep. I'm gonna wake up and I'm gonna get back to that problem in the morning. And I get to work with, some of the brightest engineers, scientists, material chemists in the world. We're solving interesting engineering problems every day. And I've got something on my mind when I'm going to bed. I've got something on my mind when I'm waking up and I'm going to the office to solve that problem.
And hanging with Pop.
Yeah, that's not too bad either.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I'm going to open it up for any questions, but before we do, why don't we give these guys a round of applause? They're literally changing the world the way things work. Any questions from the audience? Shuman.
Yeah, quick question. So I had to look up this number, but like smartphones, for example, it went from 2% penetration in 2005 to like 89% in about 10 years, right? And I saw that transition, right? Like visibly consolidation. What do you guys think is kind of new built infrastructure, sustainable technologies are going to be so broadly adopted where in a country as big as the United States, we actually see that type of visible change?
For manufacturing?
Yeah, for at least for the end products.
Question is length of adoption. So this new form of manufacturing, how long is it going to take for a country the size of the U.S. to fully adopt it into their marketing practice or manufacturing practices?
I mean, the first version of what we built was really, if you look at something that we're doing, which is really, it's literally moving from the typewriter to desktop publishing and architecting what is desktop publishing and then literally inventing the entire software hardware stack. When you're doing that, you do that not as something you create and then go after an application. You look first at an application. The auto industry was the application because auto manufacturing, when you look at it as a system, has a larger negative environmental impact than any other human activity when you include all its related activities. And so the good thing about auto is it comes in these segments. You could say like EF segment means things like Ferraris, Maseratis, Bentleys, McLarens. You could say for the first system we build, it's going to be for these vehicles that are manufactured annually for a given model in anything from hundreds of vehicles to single-digit thousands. That required a first system cost. I would say that's already been done. People like Aston Martin, now you'll see a whole string of companies announcing that we're providing these structures to them from a digital factory, which is completely revolutionary. I would say we now have a system after about 2.5 years of running this first system that can address 70% of automotive, but it requires scale up. So that over the next 10 years, there was a full page New York Times piece on the technology company, Divergent Technologies. And in it, there are a couple analysts who spent a bunch of time in the factory who are very well known Wall Street analysts. And one had been the chief strategy officer at Ford. And they basically said, in the next 10 years, this is going to be a total earthquake. It's going to totally, fundamentally disrupt the global auto industry. So I'd say that time frame, which is we do a slow scale with these EF segments over the next 2 to 3 years, and then the very rapid disruptive scale. I would say particularly in the US, on the defense application side, it may be even quicker than that, because things like large scale drones can be built so that they're much lighter, which means they have much higher in-air time, done in a much shorter period of time, both for design and manufacturing.
On behalf of the brand,
I've just gotten much better.
take a double cost 18. One for you, sir. And one for you.
I appreciate it, thank you.
And in Scotland we say Slangebar, which means to your good health. So please drink to your good health. And let's hear it again for the panel.
Awesome.